Look at this. Sold out. Can you believe this stuff?
So they were supposed to deliver it in October.
This is going to be an update on the kettlebell shortage.
I just want my shoe. Give me my shoe, please.
Then it was supposed to be November. No. Then December.
Give me my PlayStation. Am I wrong for wanting this, bro? I mean, everything just sucks lately.
Take my money. Take my money. I don't want it. Give me my shoe.
Every time I check my email, it's stuck on this right here. I don't even know what that means.
Tonight, one word sums up the feeling along every line of the supply chain: frustration.
Well, the shortages and delays in the global supply chain threaten a total paralysis.
When the pandemic hit, businesses anticipated that the COVID recession was coming. They thought that demand was going to drop. But something funny happened. The opposite of what all of these businesses and economists predicted happened. Demand exploded. People bought things like crazy. And now supply chains are choking on that record demand. Everyone has had the experience of not being able to get something, and everyone has had the experience of paying more for something. Prior to the pandemic, most of us just took it for granted that we could get things ever faster. E-commerce made it seem like everything was right at our doorstep. But that obscures what was a 14,000-mile journey halfway around the world. It took months. And when you add up all the automation, all the algorithms, all of the hundreds of people who had to touch those goods or transport them in some way, it's in total one of the most complicated endeavors that human beings ever engage in. And yet it happens millions of times per day. And we take it for granted because all of that has been rolled behind this ultimate convenience of just one-click e-commerce shopping. But the pandemic showed us just how unsustainable and unrealistic that expectation is.
Well, American food producers, grocers, and customers feeling the impact of the war in Ukraine as they brace for substantial price hikes. Nate Foy live for us in the New York City newsroom with more on this. Nate, good morning.
Trace, good morning to you. Ukraine and Russia are two of the world's leading grain exporters, but the war will threaten the supply that they provide. And of course, this comes as Americans are already paying more for food because of inflation and supply chain issues.
American shoppers should expect that unfortunately their grocery bills are going to go up.
Rob Mackey is the president and CEO of the American Bakers Association. He says bread makers across the country are feeling the pressure from the war in Ukraine. And the longer the conflict goes on, the more it will affect the global food supply system.
If you take essentially one of the top wheat-growing regions out of production for a year, that's going to have a ripple effect, substantial ripple effect.
Known as Europe's breadbasket, Ukraine, along with Russia, are two of the world's 5 leading exporters of wheat. Together, they produce 25% of the global supply.
And unfortunately, this is going to impact the most vulnerable in our society, many of whom are still feeling the impacts of the pandemic.
We're looking every day at inflation almost reaching 10%.
Dan Veroni is a supply chain expert and founder of Potomac Core. He says that rising costs for energy and other raw materials, such as seed oils, will put the squeeze on consumer cost.
It's energy costs that are going to choke consumers at every level. As food companies need to stay competitive.
A recent report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that consumer food prices have risen nearly 8% since February 2021.
Food markets are globalized, so to a certain extent, it's impossible to avoid the impacts of disruptions like this.
Caitlin Welsh is a food policy expert at the Center for Strategic International Studies. Though other countries face direct threats to their food supplies due to the war, she says Americans are not totally insulated from the impact.
I do think that this is going to continue to put more upward pressure for a longer amount of time on prices in the U.S. than if we didn't have this war. It's through increase in prices of these inputs that you see farmers are going to have to pay a lot more to produce, and then consumers are going to have to pay a lot more to buy this food.
In late October, over 100 container ships floated in the waters outside of L.A., waiting to unload at the dock. The global pandemic triggered sky-high consumer spending on manufactured goods as opposed to vacations or other services. So this bottleneck will persist, according to supply chain analysts like Laura Cesari.
We're going to be facing shortages on the retail shelf. Electric tools, home goods, computers and monitors, or special clothing. Those goods are on those ships in the middle of the ocean. We'll have shortages for the holidays, and then we'll have a glut of inventory because we will have unloaded those containers too late.
Authorities in Shanghai announced a snap two-stage lockdown of the city as they raced to contain a spiraling COVID-19 outbreak in China's biggest city and its financial capital. Panicked residents rushed to supermarkets to stock up on food and essential supplies, with many videos circulating on social media and reports on the ground talking about empty supermarket shelves and rising prices of vegetables. Since the lockdown in the east and south of the city began on Monday, barricades could be seen splitting up the city. Many metro services and bus lines were suspended, and some companies, including Tesla, suspended manufacturing for 4 days. Throughout the pandemic, China has kept to a policy of acting swiftly to test and isolate those infected and imposing targeted lockdowns, thereby keeping cases very low and cutting off transmission chains as they emerge. Currently, the country is battling the worst outbreak of COVID since the virus first emerged in Wuhan more than 2 years ago.